Morning.
Good morning.
How are you? First year.
Well, yeah.
Ian, my goodness.
Oh, good morning, Mr. Kevin. How are you, mate?
Good, thank you.
Morning,
We're getting the band back together here. Eh?
How's Aberdeen?
Very good. Well, overcast as usual, but I can't see the hills from here. But rained a little bit overnight, but it'll dry out today.
You still locked down or locked up, or?
Well, I'm locked up. I'm just phoning you for the bail money.
I know you weren't enough to say that, you see. So
No, I can't. We're not allowed in the centre of Aberdeen, which is fair enough.
I'm meaning to give you a call, Kevin. One of these days, I'll catch up.
Yeah, I'll do it. But interestingly enough, Robin, just if you want, for your comments, a fair few of the hotels on the outskirts of Aberdeen, as in Aberdeenshire, as opposed to Aberdeen Central, have chosen to close because they don't want that business coming out to them.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah.
At the moment. So it's just, it's a very unusual time, obviously, but you know, football players from Aberdeen, I mean, they're just young guys. I mean, that's what happens. But you know, the Celtic player to go off to bloody Spain and come back and play is just bloody stupid. But well, everybody's got to take the punishment for that. But it wasn't just the football players. I mean, when you see the footage, the people got overrun, and we're obviously having no sales all year. We're making a queue to keep people in. So I get it, but it's just the wrong thing. It just shows you can't be too
common sense, is it?
Yeah. Well, yeah, but I mean, if you have no money in the bank account and lots of people are queuing up to get in, it's very tempting to let that happen. But of course, it's good that somebody's seen it, and you know.
Have you heard? Has Gill reopened his hotels, Kevin?
Pardon?
Has Gill reopened his hotels?
I can't understand.
Has Gill reopened his hotels?
Oh, no, I don't think so.
No, not I heard he hadn't, but I'm not sure if you'd heard.
Well, it might have done, because there are sometimes they just take in workmen. I mean, you know,
he was doing that the odd guy, wasn't he?
A big chunk of the business in Dunoon is coach parties, and they're not going to. Who's going to travel in a coach with, you know, people over 50, 60?
Yeah. Morning, Stephen.
Good morning.
Morning. Morning, Mark.
Oh.
Morning, Barry.
Here.
Morning.
Morning, Francesco. How is everybody today?
I can hear you. Good morning. Now I can hear you. Can you hear me well?
Yeah, now we can, yeah.
I was kind of lost with those new guys over here. How is the weather over there?
Well, here in Bristol, it's sort of a bit murky, but at least it's not raining.
Oh, well.
Dublin is basically November.
Yeah.
Oh, well, and up in north of Scotland, it's cloudy, haven't got good visibility, and it was raining overnight, so everything's damp.
It's funny because looking at you from here, Kevin, it looks as if it's sunshine outside.
Yes, I know. The garage is on fire. I'll tone this down because I've got to kind of work with these blinds a wee bit to get. Otherwise, people think I'm in the Riviera. Good morning.
Morning, Barry.
Yeah.
Morning, folks. How are we all?
Hello.
I'm good, thank you.
Morning, Essa.
Morning.
But there is a baby somewhere. Where is the baby?
Not mine.
All guilty. All guilty.
No, it's my cat here.
Yeah.
I've just put the dog in his room so he doesn't disturb us, but no babies, that's for sure.
There you go. You'd say hello to everybody.
Oh,
Hello,
nice.
The funny thing
Hey.
is, oh, there's the cat, Kevin. Funny thing is,
It's after my mouse.
Russell's more than happy to jump up on the camera when you don't want him to. And a few weeks ago, I was speaking at a networking event for dog owners, and I particularly wanted him to be there. And he goes all camera shy and wouldn't come near me. So, quite typical. Quite typical.
Yeah.
So, how's everybody getting on?
Yeah.
Well, it's gone quiet.
Well, I'm just back from Italy, so I had a good time over there. Now back to reality in Dublin for a couple of weeks. Hotel-wise, is still very bad, to be honest. It's very quiet. It didn't change too much since the last meeting. We are getting some reservation for September, but we as well as a bunch of cancellation, because what happened here is that a lot of American tourists that travel booked for March, April, and May, they did postpone at the first time for September. But now they are still not in position to travel, so they are canceling as well the second booking, and that one was the last chance to have some Americans, not group, because group have been cancelled completely since
I think Mr. Trump's got a lot to answer for the
Mr. Trump is better.
Irish leisure market. Till they can be getting control over there, we won't be getting many of American visitors, unfortunately.
Yeah.
That's
Then there is this green list over here that it's working as far as I know, kind of okay. But now there is an update on the green list that I'm not sure when, but I guess this week or next week maximum, because they said it was going to be every 2 weeks an update.
No, we'll see if they're like government here that give an update at the last minute and have people running for the border. How is everybody? Hi Andrea. Hi Julian. Lauren.
Good morning. Morning all. How are we doing?
Morning.
Just waiting for, should be busy today, for the 10 o'clock when they start flooding in. So did you have a good holiday, Barry?
I did indeed, thank you. Last time seemed to be on fast forward last week. I blinked on Monday morning and the next thing I knew it was Saturday. So it must have been a good week.
Did you staycation, Barry, or did you travel further afield?
I actually just stayed at home, Julian. We
that's the real staycation. That's a true staycation.
We had hoped to. There's a little bit of a funny backstory to it. We had hoped to get away for a couple of days, for 2 or 3 days, and the first plan was that we were going to go up to the northeast. Well, that was scuppered because Aberdeen's currently in lockdown, so that plan was scuppered. Then I suppose the good news is that my partner went back from furlough last week, so that put a stop to any plans of going away for a couple of days. But more than happy that he's back at work. That's the better news.
Good stuff.
The upside, we did nevertheless have belated birthday treat. We had a lunch at the kitchen last week, which was as good as ever.
Very good.
Tom Kitchen was actually in the kitchen this time, which was really nice to see. We've been a couple of times. And I have to say it was superb. It was absolutely superb. the interesting part from that, I was having a chat with Matteo, the maitre d', and we were just having a chat about business levels and how they coped. Their booking diary is pretty much full for the next 12 to 14 weeks. I think we were fairly lucky to get a table. They've managed to keep they've managed to maintain all of the covers in the restaurant by moving things around. They've dispensed with their bar area. They've created dining tables in the bar. And there's a very nice but a rather chilly bar area outside overlooking the quayside. Nice on a nice day. I wouldn't want to try it on a typical Scottish wet day. But even so, he tells me that
could be a Wednesday, Barry.
Even though they're essentially full on every service, they're still only trading at about 75% of historical turnover. And although
have they bought in that sort of little private dining room that they have into general use, do you know, or have they kept that separate?
Still keeping that separate. There was a small party dining in there the day that we were in, but of course in Scotland you can only have up to 8 people in a party anyway, so they're a bit restricted in what they can do with it. Socially distanced, I don't imagine you'd get much more than 8 or 10 people in there anyway.
It's pretty tight.
What they've lost is the ability to turn tables around during the service as much. So they're finding they can only turn a table once during a service, whereas in the old days they could maybe turn it 2 or 3 times. So that was interesting. Good to see them opening. Good to see them.
Yeah.
Well, right. They're now 10 o'clock. I think we should get the ball rolling. Welcome everybody. Happy you could all make it. A couple of them today. Gillian and Nicola Monkhouse and Luke. Luke's got a back trouble, but send him our wishes. So before we get into the presentations and stuff, just like to give a mention. I know there's a lot of people out there in the industry, colleagues and everything, who are suffering redundancies and stuff. There's a couple of initiatives out there, which I'll include the links in the summary afterwards, but I just thought I'd give it a mention. There's one that started up called Back to Walk Support by a guy called Thomas Kilroy, who are basically setting up a network to help people and hopefully getting sponsorship from the big companies to help them sort of sort out when they have redundancy, sort out their CVs, get links and all the rest of it. And there's another one called the Coffee Club, which is on a Monday at 9 a.m., which is a similar vein. It's just more of the casual stuff. So if you've got anybody, any colleagues or anybody you know who's in the unfortunate situation, take a note of the links that I'll put in the summary, and please let them know about these initiatives, because all we can do to sort of help those people is a good thing. And to start off today, Andy Merrick couldn't be with us, but he's happily sent along Neil Hazard to give us an update on licensing changes, recent licensing changes up there in Scotland.
Good morning, folks. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, good. The rather unusual backdrop is that I am currently awaiting a police intervention. So I'm sitting in a car park for a lockdown room letting. So very apt for today. I'm obviously can't go into any more details. Thanks for having me. I'm grateful for Andy throwing my hat into the ring, allowing me to speak to you today. There's been a volume of changes in Scotland over the last number of weeks. And really, I think the noise came to a bit of a crescendo on Friday for a lot of operators with the update to the statutory guidance. So the first thing I think is probably worth pointing out is that the regulations in relation to track and trace and customer details have effectively crystallised. It is now a legal requirement for all operators in the hospitality and tourism sector to take track and trace details from people who attend at their venues. I encourage everyone to read the detail, but very briefly, we are now no longer talking about simply taking the lead customers' details. We're taking details for one person from every household in relation to a booking. And there's also further requirements to take details of any other persons who attended the venue, whether that be contractors, delivery drivers, and of course all of the plethora of staff and casual workers that may be there, cleaners, etc. And that all has to be taken on a contemporaneous basis and held for the 21 days. Failure to do any of that is actually an enforceable offence. So I think that's the first thing, and that's one of the headlines, albeit I don't think necessarily it took many of the actual press headlines. There were other changes the First Minister announced, and whilst I must underline, I am not suggesting for 1 minute that people do not implement these changes. The following changes that I'm going to go on to describe are changes which are updates to statutory guidance. They have not been carried through into regulations. So whilst I'm not espousing the view that these should be ignored, these are, I think it's important to distinguish, different from what I've just described in relation to the mandatory track and trace. The changes do come out of, and I was interested, I was earwigging into the sort of initial pleasantries, and there was discussion around the Aberdeen lockdown. I think a few of these changes have come through from senior civil servants in the First Minister's office as a result of some concerns, not just in Aberdeen, but just generally being fed back in about the operation of the wider hospitality industry. But for the avoidance of doubt, these changes do catch the whole hospitality industry. So the statutory guidance applies to accommodation providers as well. So it's important to sort of see how these might subtly affect the way in which businesses operate in the hotel sector. So one of them is to avoid, wherever possible, any internal queuing. And that's really an attempt to get internal queuing down to zero. So processes in place within businesses to manage customer arrival times. So in the hotel, that could be the check-in times, the managed customer departure times. Again, that is something which needs to be as slick as humanly possible. Where queuing does have to occur, the preference is that queuing should be externally, and that queuing, of course, needs to comply with the social distancing. So there's a management requirement on that, whether that's the very in vogue and common floor markers, pieces of tape marking out the distances, or physically having staff present in queues at peak times to ensure that people are keeping their distance. The other thing which comes in and is part of the statutory guidance is in relation to customers coming to survey points. And the statutory guidance seeks to oblige customers to be seated at tables and for there to be a table service only facility operating. I think probably in terms of the general operation of a lot of hospitality businesses, they have defaulted to table service. So this is going to be, I think, a little bit of a tweak on the general operation as opposed to a wholesale change. The one which really caught the actual headlines, and the one which certainly has been fed back to me from a plethora of clients, whether they're hoteliers, restaurateurs, publicans, is that the statutory guidance also sought at this stage to prohibit the playing of any background music and to silence TV volume to mute. Now, the background to this is the fact that there's concern around whether having background music and or TVs on results in customers requiring to raise their voice, greater aerosol created by the raising of voice, and thus the greater possibility for transmission of COVID through the droplets, especially when hospitality businesses, of course, can operate at the 1 metre social distancing. Now, when the First Minister was looking at the reopening of hospitality venues circa 2nd of July, the initial shorthand guidance mentioned no background music, and there was a considerable backlash for reasons I'm sure you'll all appreciate from all sides of the hospitality sector. The guidance 2nd July to 10th July was amended to allow some low-level background music and low-level TV volumes. However, anecdotally, it's been fed back to the government that that's been nigh on impossible to enforce. And unfortunately, as is often the case, anecdotal accounts of a small minority of operators across all sectors, perhaps pushing it to the boundary and beyond with regards to the levels. So the First Minister on Friday announced that the statutory guidance would oblige no background music and no TV volume. She did, however, leave the door slightly ajar because the announcement was couched with the caveat that they would work with industry to try and come up with a more nuanced position to allow some return of background music and TV volumes, maybe to a set prescribed decibel level. I say this has probably been the one that's taken the headlines. I'll really be interested in the conversation after my presentation to see whether this is a concern for operators in the hotel sector. But I've certainly had hoteliers on expressing concerns about the effect it's had on the communal areas of the hotels. I've had a host of restaurateurs on and publicans on as well, and obviously, talking about concerns about the atmosphere and the fact it's been an atmosphere vacuum over the last weekends, and really wanting to take this forward at a pace. Now, I think I started this by making the distinction between what is statutory guidance and what is actual regulation. So I'm happy to take any questions on that, but sort of to preempt that, the regulations insofar as they relate to the coronavirus restrictions set down matters which are enforceable under the regulations, and that means that environmental health officers and other appointed persons can issue prohibition notices and the like. They set down matters which are in themselves offences. So by the act or omission, you are in breach of the coronavirus regulations. A good example of that would be the social distancing regulations. And those are things which could ultimately lead to prosecution. However, the regulations as they are currently drafted expressly carve out matters which are simply dealt with under statutory guidance. Matters which are dealt with under statutory guidance, such as the queuing restrictions, such as the ban on background music and TV volumes, they are expressly carved out of the enforcement procedures within the regulations at present. So it is not technically the case that an environmental health officer can serve a prohibition notice for a breach of one of these statutory guidance matters, nor is it a case that simply by breaching the statutory guidance measure, an operator is committing an offence. So there's been a lot of changes. I've tried to focus the time that I've had available on the most recent changes. However, as I close the sort of presentational element of what I've just described from Friday, I'm happy to answer any questions about some of the wider restrictions and implications. I hope that was a useful wee update. I was conscious that it did have a sort of short time given the overall 30 minutes. So as we approach the 1:15, I think I'll stop and invite you all now to ask any questions you have and hand back over to Robin. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, a reminder that is actually the situation in Scotland for anybody who's south of the border. However, as we know, possibly our own, the UK, the English government will probably end up taking some of these on board once they realise that actually they make some sense. But has anybody got any questions for Niall? No? Okay. So we'll move on swift. Thank you, Niall. That was very informative. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. I hope. And if anyone has any questions that they didn't want to ask during the actual presentation piece, I'm happy for Robin to circulate my details and people can ask questions privately if there's matters of particular concern for their business. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks very much. For those of us north of the border, thank you very much indeed. So that was, very detailed and precise information there. So thank you, much appreciated.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And moving swiftly on to Barry. What? Sorry. Sorry, did somebody have a question?
No, for Niall, just first part of the presentation, just in the 20 days for record for the guest, they've attended the venue, say. Is that correct or I misunderstand?
So in Scotland, I think you're referring to the data retention period, which is recommended at a minimum of 21 days. The balance that operators have to strike is the retention of the data for a period which allows it to effectively be used for track and trace, given that the incubation period for the virus can be 14 days, but also not keep it for a period which is prolonged and thus risk data protection and GDPR issues. So the data has to have effectively a shelf life. The government set a minimum of 21 days. I know some operators are doing 28. Some operators are perhaps doing 30. What I would encourage people to do is have a policy so that you have a mechanism for retaining the data for the, no less than the minimum period required. But ultimately, you also have a mechanism to ensure that that data is cleansed moving forward, so that it's not, in breach. And the other thing, which I think is absolutely fundamental, is that there have been some isolated incidents where people have taken that customer data for the purposes of track and trace and then used it for marketing activity. Unless you've had specific consent from the client or patron that has allowed you to add that to your marketing comms and your marketing lists, then that data is being collected solely for the purpose of supporting the track and trace here. So it shouldn't be used for any other purpose and should be destroyed at the end of the period. Does that make sense?
Perfect. Yes. So my question was indeed for the maximum number of time that we can keep this record, and we'll make sure that we will then delete all the information in order to be compliant with GDPR. Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm not sure about Dublin, but isn't it in England? This is 21 days is the maximum you can keep it.
Not sure. I don't know if Niall knows about the English. Andy? Did I see Andy here earlier?
Yeah, I'm here, Robin. I don't know on that one. There is some guidance on it. I thought it was 21 days, but I would have to check up on that one. It's not, again, really to pick up on something that you said just after Niall had made his presentation, which, very informative regarding Scottish legislation now that's been brought in. England and Wales, I do believe that the legislation and guidance that the England Wales government have put in place very much gave the operators a lot more on guidance than legislation, and hoping that they would use common sense to do right this. I have noticed there's a huge variance in the way operators are implementing or not implementing that guidance in the UK. And as you've said, I think don't be at all surprised to see the England and Wales have further restrictions enforced on them rather than just guidance down the line, because there's certainly a lot of operators that aren't really following the guidance at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's. I just had a quick look, and I think it says that for England and here it says that you can keep that information for 21 days.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've got one question from Stuart here, saying, "What does anybody know what happens if somebody refuses to give the information?"
The First Minister's directive on this, again, bearing in mind what I said about the difference between statutory guidance and regulations, is no information, no service. So that's the Scottish position. If people refuse to give the data, then hospitality operators are expected to refuse to provide the service.
Simple enough.
Yeah, again, on England and Wales, it's a case of if they're not compelled to give it. So again, people can refuse to give their information if they want, and you can still serve them.
Okay.
Hi, Robin. Could I ask what's people's kind of general feelings in terms of, are they using technology? There's various apps and systems on the market, or are people using simple pen and paper to record these things? Does anybody know? Have you seen apps and working to capture these details, or? Because obviously using pen and paper, first of all, is staff capturing the right information, and number two, where does that sheet of paper go considering the GDPR requirements in the handling of data.
It's a valid point because, yeah, according to GDPR, that data has to be stored in a safe place and obviously disposed of correctly. I mean, in my experience, I've seen a bit of both. The larger players all seem to have apps. The sort of smaller places seem to be depending more on the pen and paper. There are some decent apps out there that are doing not just the track and trace, but the ordering and the payment online as well. So it is not really an excuse because most of them are even doing it free of charge for the first year. So it's just a case of whether people can sort of like are motivated enough to put those apps in, or whether they're just happy enough to take the details on paper. And again, it's like Andy said, in England and Wales, it's not so much sort of obliged to do it or forced to do it as perhaps Scotland. So some people perhaps are just ignoring that. But I don't know if anybody else has got any experience of sort of that.
The one thing I'd sort of feedback from the clients that have contacted us, those that have sought to leverage app technology, have quite quickly found that perhaps due to issues around demography of client base, they've had to go to a hybrid, whereby, I don't want to make a sweeping generalization, but typically what they're saying is the older generation are less au fait and less able to simply rely on the apps, unless of course you're providing the iPad, etc., for the staff to do. But a lot of them who initially went for QR codes and scan yourself in have had to hybridize the operation, so that they've given the customer the option to fill in a paper copy form, because people were saying that they weren't au fait with the technology and able to use it. In terms of the keeping it secure, the guidance generally just obliges operators to keep the paper copies, etc., out of sight and away from any public areas, and for the digital records to have whatever system you are using password protected.
Okay. Yeah. And Stuart, following question: is it illegal and an arrestable offence? Sorry, Stuart. Is what illegal? Is keep not taking the data, or what was that?
No, what I was asking was, if a customer refuses to give the information, it's all very well saying, well, we don't serve them, but you know, what is the law? So, for example, if it's the law, it's a huge difference in, you know, applying that decision to a customer. I mean, most customers, once you tell them it's illegal, you know, it's legal, then they cooperate a lot more than if you say, well, I'm sorry, I'm just not going to serve you, as if like you've just made that decision.
In Scotland, the position is that it's a legal requirement on the hospitality operator to obtain those details. And if they don't, it's the hospitality operator that is effectively in breach of the regulations. And thus, that's why the First Minister's position north of the border is, if a customer refuses to provide those details, then you should, for fear of breaching the regulations, refuse to serve that individual. And of course, we have the long enshrined principle of a licence holder's right to refuse service, provided you're not refusing service on one of the protected characteristic grounds, and it's not discrimination, which it wouldn't be, because you'd be refusing service based on overarching legal responsibility to get the required information. Then simply you would be refusing service and asking them to leave. Now, I can't espouse a view on the position south of the border. Perhaps Andy can help me. But certainly north of the border, there is an offence that is committed whereby a patron refuses to leave licensed premises.
We've lost you. Yeah. Andy, perhaps you could pick up. I think Niall's just gone on mute for some.
Right, I beg your pardon. I think it was just a wee cut out then.
Andy?
Yeah, so England and Wales, there is no legal requirement to collect the data. It is just guidance. There are a number of the larger operators that are making it their policy. They collect data from one member of the group. And if people don't want to give it, then they're saying, well, sorry, we can't serve you. And I think that's a great idea. There are some good apps out there that solely do data capture and are very simple to implement and use. You know, so I would encourage anybody to be using those apps. Again, have a fallback, as Noah said, that you can use pen and paper and input those onto the customers at a later stage if you wish to, but make it as simple as possible for yourselves and as quick as possible. The last thing you want to be doing is spending ages collecting data and making it difficult for the customers and difficult for your staff. So make it as simple as possible. Use technology, but there is no legal requirement at the moment. But I think it will come.
Sorry, Robin, question for Niall. One quick question. Is it okay for the customers to write down their data, their personal data, when they reach a table, or do we have to take it for them and keep it?
No, I mean, it's okay for the customer to write down the data. I guess from an operational point of view, you would need to ensure that the front of house staff are checking that data has actually been provided before getting into and engaging in the service, because I anticipate that's much more difficult just operationally if people are seated and perhaps have their round of drinks in front of them and then refuse to provide that data for an effective refusal of service and termination of that service and payment for those drinks, etc., to be taken. So I guess there's no hard and fast rule of whether it has to be at the door, etc., but you just have to think it through from a logical operational point of view as to where the least amount of conflict is likely to arise should someone refuse.
Which is where the ordering apps come in, because if they have to put their details in to actually make their order, then obviously it kind of simplifies the whole operation. But yeah, and anybody else?
Yeah, Niall, is it just for one person per party, right? It's not for every single customer.
So again, I'm covering off the Scottish side of things. The requirement in Scotland is that it's one person per household. So if you have a table which, for example, has 2 families within the maximum household numbers and the maximum overall numbers, then one person from each household must provide their data in order to comply, not just one person from the group as a whole.
So for 6 friends, is 6 data that you mean?
We couldn't have 6 friends in one table in Scotland because of the limits on household numbers. It's a maximum of 3 households inside in Scotland. But yes, the principle you raise, Francesco is right. If you had, 3 individuals from 3 different households, they would all have to provide their data.
Okay, so wondering if in Ireland is different, because we are taking basically one data per table, and the maximum of people is 6, as far as I know. So I'm not sure. Okay.
I'm afraid David's not with us today. So
okay.
How we...
I mean, what we are doing here is what is what I said. So, but yeah.
Okay. I think we need to move on. I ran the survey after the last forum, got quite a lot of good information coming back from people. Thank you very much for those who assisted. And Barry's put a bit together of what the figures are telling us about business at the moment and where we think it's going. Thank you.
Robin, thank you very much indeed. So good morning, everybody. Yes, as Robin mentions there, following the last forum, Robin issued some survey questions out to a number of people. What I've done is analysed and collated the responses that we've received, and I'm not going to go through this in a huge amount of detail. The graphs that I've created, I think, are quite self-explanatory. What I'll be able to do is add in for you some of the commentary notes that came along with the hard data that we received back. So over the next 10 minutes or so, I'm just going to run you through some tables with the results that we received from that survey. Just to put this into context for you, I think it would be fair to say that this probably can't be described as a highly scientific survey. It was largely anecdotal. I'm not sure, Robin, how many survey questions did you send out? Can you recall?
I think there were 6 questions, 5 questions. There was question on the actual how things are going, question on the costs, question on customer replies, and how we thought things were going in the future.
Okay.
So, yeah.
I'm maybe a bit clumsy in the way I asked the question. How many people did you contact initially?
Oh, sorry. I contacted about 100, and I got about 50%. Well, 40%.
37 responses that we
Yeah.
received. Yeah. So put it into context there, there's about 40% of those asked who've responded. So without further ado, let's quickly run through. So question number 1 was asking operators to give us an insight into the volume of reduction, how much their business levels have dropped through the lockdown and the coronavirus period. So as we can see here, so 37 responses were received, from the vast majority being directly those operating or owning hotels. We had a couple of responses coming back from those within the supply chain who I think were sharing information from their clients, and I've noted those within the results. Now, the first thing that stands out to me from the spread of data, I was quite fascinated by the breadth of results that we were getting in from those telling us that since they've been able to reopen their business at whatever stage that was during July, depending upon where they were located within the UK or within Ireland, we had responses ranging from actually business levels have recovered really well, we're only 10 to 15% down, to the other extreme of, and as you can see from the data, the bulk of responses have come back between the 60 and 80%, with the 70 to 80% column being the greatest. That also includes a couple of responders whose businesses haven't been able to reopen yet. So actually have seen I've seen their complete anticipated revenue for the summer period wiped out. But as we can see, there's quite a breadth there, but the majority of responses were coming back within the 60 to 80% drop in business compared year on year. And I focused the results particularly on people's anticipated volumes for August, because it was going to give us their estimation for a full trading month. The responses in terms of July, at best, we had people who were being able to trade for about 3.5 weeks in July. For those north of the border, it really was only the last 2 weeks of the month that people were able to trade. So the responses in terms of July specifically was much higher, skewed towards the 80 to 90% drop in business compared year on year. I think that answers what all of us would anecdotally say, that the impact upon business levels in hospitality has been immense. And I think, that with bar 1 or 2 exceptions at the low level, then that really is what's been reflected in the responses. It's worth noting from the comments, from the commentary that was also alongside the hard figures on people's responses, those who are at the bottom end of the reduction, those are in the sort of 20 to 30% or below, are largely businesses which were food and beverage driven, but excluding events businesses. And that really would follow the trend that one would expect. So we did have some responses from some relatively smaller hotel operations, which had very strong pub and bar operations. And they've responded, they've been able to recover quite well with the responses since they've been able to reopen, particularly their expectations for August. The other extreme, those events businesses, couple of respondees who are very much in the wedding market, they've pretty much seen their business wiped out. So following on from that, the next question was looking at the proportion of operating costs increase, the increase that people have seen on their operating expenditure as a direct result of measures they've had to put in place. And again, quite interesting results here. Now it's somewhat skewed. The large brown column that you see at the very top of the chart actually represents the no responses. But from those who did respond, it was quite interesting, I thought, to see that the overwhelming response at 27% of those that replied were actually reporting an increase of less than 5% in their operating costs. As we can see, in the 10 to 15 and the 15 to 20% marks, similar responses, 11% on each, and then the higher levels we're seeing a much lower response rate. Again, anecdotally from the comments that were being received, Those who are at the higher levels that are in the 20 and 30% levels, those would have been the operators who have made some quite significant investment, particularly in the upfront equipment, things such as fogging hand sanitizers. One person had reported investing a 5-figure sum in one of the temperature guns in one of the non-contact thermometers in order to test people's temperatures coming into the premises. That was a 5-figure sum being reported there. But in general, the overwhelming response was that less than 5%. A number of responses there as well, saying that people expected to see some of the initial expenditure and outlay being offset by other reductions in their operating costs, such as tea, coffee supplies, and a reduction in the amount of linen that was being used with the reduced servicing of rooms, which is now commonplace. In terms, we also asked about the type of guest feedback that was being received since businesses were able to reopen and with the new control measures in place. And not surprisingly, but some interesting trends here. Overwhelmingly, 81% reported that they had overwhelmingly positive responses from customers. There's a lot of the commentary mentioned that operators were finding guests very sympathetic to the new systems that we're having to operate under. Many people were sympathetic and understanding of the measures that were in place, and that for those who had really spent some time, invested time and effort in putting very obvious control measures in place, that actually they were finding they were receiving specific positive feedback from customers about that, which in some cases was leading to repeat business. So 81% commented on receiving overwhelmingly positive feedback. 0, there was no responses that said they'd had particularly negative feedback or particular issues. So the remaining 19% is taken up by those who either the businesses are not open, those that couldn't directly comment on operational matters, or where we had about 11% of no responses. One of the interesting comments that came through from the survey, a couple of our responders who are within the large leisure resort type businesses, ironically all of them commented that overwhelmingly feedback was positive, but they'd all experienced those instances of those certain customers who didn't seem to even realise there was a global pandemic. Any complaints that were being generated were for things like, why is the swimming pool closed? And you could certainly sense an element of frustration coming through in some of the responses that were there. But overwhelmingly positive feedback. An interesting one here. We asked whether operators were feeling the need to discount in order to drive business volume, to rebuild business on the books. And the response, 51% responded that no, they saw no need, or they weren't implementing any discounting, that they were holding rate, and a real mixture of comments that was coming back through. Now, in general, the broad response was that for the leisure-orientated businesses, there was reasonably strong demand, especially through August, through the traditional holiday period. Another trend that I noticed, and this, again, not particularly scientific, but just drawing out anecdotally from the data, was that when we looked geographically at the responses, there did seem to be a bit of a trend there that the further south, and for those businesses that were leisure orientated, the responses were that there was less need to discount. There did, however, seem to be a trend, even for leisure businesses, the further north you came in the UK, the operators were feeling more pressure to be discounting in order to win business from competitors. So an interesting one there. Some of the other anecdotal comments that were coming through from the commentary was that some operators weren't necessarily discounting their base rates, but they were building value into their packaging and adding value into the proposition for the customer rather than just directly discounting. Another interesting trend that came out from this particular question, we noticed 1 or 2 instances of businesses operating within the same marketplace, but not necessarily the same dynamic of business. One might be more leisure orientated, one might have been more corporate orientated, but within the same geographic marketplace. And there were some interesting responses there, in terms of the businesses that were doing well, the businesses that were finding the need to discount, and were finding a big reduction in year-on-year business levels. And the trend that I would draw from that would appear to be those businesses that were more leisure orientated, that were independent rather than branded, and who were focusing upon building dynamic packages and focusing upon selling their the benefits and the focusing on their sales activity to attract clients rather than purely just discounting, were the ones who were seeing better performance. The ones who were focusing more upon cost control and sticking to brand standards were feeling the need to discount greater. So an interesting commentary there. Last but not least, and this one, I have to say, this one I found fascinating. We asked respondents for their personal opinion. When did they feel that they were likely to see business levels returning to pre-COVID, to 2019 levels? And I was a little surprised, I have to say, that the overwhelming response was by the end of 2021. 2022 came in at 19%, end of 23 at 19% as well. We did have a 16% no response. We actually had 8% of respondents who said, I'm pretty much back at 2019 levels already. Again, that tended to be the very wet and food and beverage driven smaller businesses. I mean, a small measure, 3% at end of this year, 2020. I was encouraged to see the optimism that people anticipated to be returning to pre-COVID business levels by the end of 2021. Certainly hope that proves to be the case. And that was a little bit more, I have to say, from a personal level, more optimistic than I was expecting to see in these responses. So I will be sharing these simple tables. Robin will be sending them out with his usual mop-up email after the event. Hope you find that very interesting. We've purposefully anonymized all of the data. So rather than labeling any specific comments to X business said, a number of the respondents did ask us to, they were happy to share information, but did ask us to keep any specific comments anonymous. So we have, we've aggregated, dare I use that word in the current climate, we've aggregated the responses that have come in, and I've allocated as a percentage of the responses that we received for each of the tables that's there. But I think a very useful exercise, Robin. Thank you for coordinating that, and some interesting responses that came out of there. Generally, a lot of it was kind of on trend as you would expect, but as always, there was one or two surprises in there as well. Happy to take any questions if anyone has. And as I say, we'll be sharing these tables with the mop-up email after the forum today.
Thank you very much, Barry. Does anybody have any questions on that? Any observations that they'd like to add about where they think we're going? No. Okay. One thing I tended obviously to notice is that what everybody knows now is the leisure, the outside the city centres is doing a lot better than the actual city centres. Most city centres locations were really struggling, and they tended to be doing more of the discounting and stuff. But yeah, it's interesting to see that there's a lot of optimism towards things getting back online by the end of next year. Let's hope that's the case. And with that,
very much agree with that, Robin. There was very much. I think there was more, I saw more optimism in the results than maybe expected. Perhaps I was just being a bit sceptical. I did see more optimism there. The other thing that I pulled from it, particularly looking at businesses in a similar marketplace, those who are focusing on their sales activity, on the marketing activity, they're very proactive in social media. We're not necessarily going down the reliance upon the OTAs or upon voucher deals. They were the ones who are tending to report more optimistic results than, as you say, the city centre, more corporate style, the businesses that fairly predictably are finding it challenging at the moment. some of our respondents there who are very much in the events and wedding market, fair to say that the responses in those areas were a lot more negative.
Okay, right. So moving swiftly on, my turn. I'm going to give a short presentation on revenue reporting. So just 1 minute, let me share my screen with everybody. Hopefully everybody can see that. So revenue reports in hotels, why do we need them? Well, anybody who's seen my presentation on forecasting will know I tend to assimilate the budget to a roadmap. We set out the idea of where we want to go and what route we're going to take. And then the GPS is more of the forecast is more of your GPS that helps you get around the roadblocks, helps you figure out where you're going to go when you've got traffic, etc., etc. But of course, the GPS doesn't work unless you know where you are on the journey. And for me, that's what a revenue report is all about. A revenue report should A, inform you and your team where you are on that journey across the month's business, should also be there to plan the rest of the journey. So I believe in a revenue report being a live document which people should be studying on a daily basis and saying, well, we're falling back on beverage revenue, we're falling back here, or we need to do a bit more here. And also, it should be a document to help motivate the team. At the end of the day, if you're motivating your team when they reach a forecast, they're more determined to reach that forecast again and again. And that's what will help produce better revenue for the business. Now, what format should a report take? Well, over my years in the business, I've seen all shades and types of business report. You've got the basic, simple three-liners. You've got the ones full of graphs and pie charts, which look really interesting, but actually don't tell you much about where you are at the time. And you've got the Bibles, which can be up to 5 or 6 pages long, which most people won't get past the first page of. In my opinion, the best kind of revenue report is one that clearly identifies where the good and the bad performance is from the day, the week, the month. And I tend to use green and red because even the most numerically challenged members of your team will clearly be able to see where the hotel is doing where it fell back, and partly analyze in their own, as far as their own position is, how they've contributed to that. All reports should have clear separation of the areas so that people understand what they're looking at and what the details are telling them. And then I wouldn't use more than 2 pages. I usually have a front page which has the main details, the main revenues, and then a second page which has more interesting details to help the management move that business forward and plan that business. I would always distribute my reports in PDF and also post a copy up on the back of house board. PDF, because there's nothing worse when you're a manager of receiving an Excel document on your phone and trying to work out what the figures are. With a PDF, you can always blow up the figures. So if you're not, eyesight's not good and you're getting on in years, you can still see clearly what all the details are and what the report's actually telling you, and move your way around that report to get more information. And why post it up on the board? Well, it's obvious. The more you feed that information to your team, the more they will want to learn about it. If you're putting the report up on the board every day, then when you walk into an area and ask somebody what the performance was on F&B yesterday, or what was this figure yesterday, then they're more likely to know the result and more likely to be looking for that result every day, so that they think about what their contribution has been to that result. And that will help the business grow. Taking it down into a bit more granular. So obviously a daily report, the most important thing is yesterday's figures. I always make sure there's a clear summary at the top of the headline figures, include things like the occupancy, ADR, RevPAR, TrevPAR. but also make sure that your team understand what those figures actually mean, so that they can understand where the business is going. I will always include a forecast. I've said that in my presentation on forecasting. I think a budget is an excellent idea to give you a long-term goal, but business changes day to day, month to month. And if you want your team to be engaged in building your business, in making the sales work, you need to have a clear target for the month, which is actually attainable. Difficult to attain, but attainable. And so I will always compare my daily figures with that forecast that I've set down for the month. When I do include a budget, I try to make sure the budget is proportional by day. There's nothing worse than looking at your reports on a Friday and thinking, yeah, we're quite well ahead of the budget, and then coming on a Monday morning and finding out you were well behind because the weekend just wasn't split proportionally on the budget side of things. And then also last year, always try to compare days with days for last year. There's not much point in comparing a Monday with a Sunday. So, and at the end of the day, these figures are just a glimpse of business. So if you're putting in last year's day, which is similar, it's giving you a better idea of how you're performing. And it's giving your team an idea of if things are going better than last year or not. Then across the page on a report, some people like to put in like day by day for the whole week, building it up. As far as I'm concerned, the main point is what's your week to day figure. And I will include a week to date for the whole week. So if it's beginning of a month, end of a month, I'll include a few days from the previous month for next month, just so that there's a glimpse of what that week is compared to what you're forecasting, compared to what the budget says for that week. And also, like again comparing the days from last year to see whether that week was comparable with the previous year or not. I'll always include a month to date actual and a month to date last year for the same reasons, to be able to compare. But I usually do something of a twist on the budget. I usually do a calculation to say, right, how much money do we have to make to get to the end of the month within budget? And that kind of gives people an idea of better how visualizing. They know how much we're doing every day. So if they can see how much we need to do every day to get the budget, it kind of helps. And then obviously the main thing I include on the report is always a month end target, a month end projection. So the actual will be the actual plus the forecast to the end of the month. And I'll compare that with the forecast I had at the very beginning of the month, because that's usually what we've reported to executives and owners and people important like that. So the team have got a clearer vision of what the target is and whether they're getting there or not. And then obviously real last year figures, real budget figures, just so there's a clear idea of where the position is. Then I would always include a breakdown of the revenues by periods and by departments. This, especially if you've got sub-teams in the F&B department, it really helps them to focus on which areas of the business are contributing and which areas need more work to make sure that things grow, the sales grow, that we're not losing revenue on one area. It's always good to see how much lounge revenue compared to the restaurant revenue. And it just sort of helps to build that team ownership of the business, which is what is important to actually increase the revenue, because they are your salespeople once those guests are in-house. So I mentioned that I always have like a second page. Well, yeah, I think it's important that you have information to help the people really understand how that revenue was created, because that will help them to take it forward. So for example, if you include guest figures and covers, etc., then you can include your average drink spends, your average food spends, possibly your average spa treatment spend. And also you can include, if you've broken down those figures into resident, non-resident, you can get your capture rates on dinner and breakfast. And in the spa, perhaps you need to include things like your percentage retail sales, because that's the extra bit that needs to drive the sales in the spa to sort of really make sure it's profitable. And all these figures together help to mold the business and help people to understand the business. So they'll understand the differences. So was it because there was a lower average spend on beverage, or was it because there were less covers here, or what was it that drove that revenue change? And that will help to create new sales promotions internally and externally to sort of drive that business forward for the rest of the month, and to help you learn for future months where you need to build on in the sales figures. Oops. I've got a bit of a shout there. So, and of course, the whole reason for doing all that, whole reason for analyzing those figures and talking through with your company is to increase sales and eventually increase profit. And it's because, and that's where I feel that the revenue report is so important. It's actually should be a driving force to see where you need to move forward, not just a document that you give a quick look at first thing in the morning and you forget about it. It should be part of your strategies, part of your moving forward the business, and it should be a way to generate ideas from your team as to how those sales can be reached. Yeah. So obviously, how do you achieve a good report? Well, the first thing is always make sure you've got all the data in one file. It can be very laborious at the start when you're setting it up. I usually set up a file for the whole year to do my revenue report and my forecasting. It takes a little time, but it means you get figures for the whole year. Can somebody do? Somebody's not on mute. Yep, fine, thank you. And it just means that when you come to produce a report daily, it's quick and easy, and it doesn't take time. All PMSs these days should have some way of converting that trial balance report into what they call a CSV or an Excel, which can be pasted into your revenue report generating tool, and that just means that it will look up automatically.
Or not open.
Just 1 minute. Who can I? Sorry, can somebody mute? Because there's somebody out there who's not on mute. Thank you.
I think it's coming through as Peter Walker. I might be wrong, but
all right. I can't see everybody because I'm right. Hopefully that's right. Sorry about that. As I was saying, so every PMS should have a way of generating this Excel or CSV. Once that's pasted into your document, it will be able to look up the information that you need in your report, and that just makes it a lot quicker to generate that report, and it means the report's a lot more accurate because it just basically pulls that information. You don't have people with input errors. You don't have people trying to figure out where does this figure go, where does the other figure go. It just makes it a very simple process. And the same goes for covers. I know a EPOS can record figures, and I know the systems out there, but I always like to keep a manual record in Excel of covers every day. Make sure the F&B team are really concentrating on giving the correct figures and updating them. Several reasons, really. First of all, I don't know how many times I've seen a table of 22 people have 2 main courses. It's an easy thing to do on an EPOS system, but once it's in there, you can't get rid of it. And if you're not looking at those figures on a daily basis, it totally throws your average spends out the window. So if you're keeping a manual record, it also means you can record who are your resident covers, who are your non-resident covers, and possibly who are your conference covers. And that is what gives you the ability to then pull off your capture rates for dinner from your residents, your average number of covers external. And they are the sort of figures that can help you to drive those sales promotions and drive that sales effort to really see where your revenue is falling down and where your revenue is growing, and work on those figures to build the business. I tend to find that these booking systems they have these days are really good. As long as you make sure every table, even if it's a walk-in, goes onto the booking system, you put a little indicator next to the ones that are residents, And then at the end of the day, you just add up the figures and you've got a record of how many guests you've had. Again, now with the whole COVID thing, we've got records of people, you know, coming in through ordering apps and everything. Use whatever tools you can to build up an accurate idea of what covers are coming into your business and where they're coming from. It's as much as important as market segments in your room revenue is knowing where your actual in-house restaurant guests are coming from. And obviously, if you have any other data that you want to include in your AD, make sure it's easy accessible and that. So more than anything, then make sure that the people who are generating the report for you stop and look at it and just employ a little bit of logic. An average breakfast spend of £125 is a dead giveaway that something has gone wrong. But I mean, as people look at it, the more they look at it, the more they will start to understand where the anomalies are, where things might not be right. And that will make the reporting better, but it also help them to say, oh, actually, that is a real anomaly. Let's put that in the comments for a report because it's something interesting. And that will help to build not only everybody else's interest in the report and knowledge from the report, but it will make them stronger as actually generating the report. And some people may laugh. They say, who creates the report? I mean, a lot of companies have an administrative sat there in an office creating it on the weekdays, and obviously the weekend they can't do anything. But I honestly, in most places, I have got there in my reception team to build that report. Because I've automated the majority of it, got those CSVs from the front office, got the covers coming through from an F&B team, which is engaged in making sure those figures are correct. I find that they're often more numerical than other members of the team. They're there 7 days a week, which means your report comes out 7 days a week. You're not waiting till mid-morning on a Monday to find out how the weekend has gone. You're seeing how on a Sunday, people will see how Saturday went on a, yep. So it's always good for them to be conscious, always aware. They often run the end of day report, which means they know when the figures are available. It does reduce the need for those office staff who in a way are only there to do office work. But if you're giving this job to reception, then if you have to put a little bit more workforce into it, then isn't it better to give an extra reception hours so that they can give better service to the client than putting somebody in an office a few more hours? I mean, it's, for me, that's the sort of my way of thinking to actually make the business more productive and make the admin function more productive. And finally, it increases their own awareness of the business. It makes them professionals who are actually owning that business and helping to sort of inform people on how business has gone and you know how they're contributing to the growth of that business rather than just producing a load of pieces of paper. So that's my take on daily reports. I hope it's been interesting. I hope you found it useful. And I don't know if anybody's got any questions they'd like to make or anything they'd like to say on that. No. Oh, thank you, Jack. Any got any comments on where they think revenue, perhaps even criticizing what I've said? It's always good to sort of like hear sort of like views on that sort of thing. No. Okay. Sorry. No. Okay. Right. Well,
Robin, I think the one thing that I might add,
very good. A very good presentation, Robin. I really like the part that you said to compare the data last year, day and not date. That it's something that it does really make sense. We have a very good presentation, and I'd love to have one of format like that. Yeah, thanks.
Right. Thank you, Barry. You were going to say something.
Robin, I would just support everything that you've just presented there, and I think I would urge everyone, it's so important to get your teams, your departmental teams, everybody within your business engaged with those basic KPIs, those basic figures within the business as soon as possible. And across the industry, and this isn't a dig at anyone in particular, across the industry, we're very good at creating a feeling of dark arts and mysteries around the P&L and around the finances of the business. We're not very good at training people as they're developing through the business in actually being able to read and analyze a simple P&L or a performance statement. And it's so important. The data drives the decisions. We then make the decisions as to how we move the business, and that's the critical thing. You know, I was recently asked to do some training for people on how to read and analyze a P&L, and it's so important. So, you know, I just encourage everybody, don't be secretive about what's in your P&L and your reporting figures. Share it, help people to understand it, because it will make a huge difference to your business performance.
Excellent. Yep, totally back that up. I've always been one to share my P&Ls with everybody in the team, sit down and take them through it and actually give them the top line information so they can understand where the business is. So anyway, we're coming to an end now. As usual, I'll be sending out the summary. I'll send out a link to the recording of this for anybody who wants to recap on something. And I'll be sending out those links to those people who are helping to support people on redundancy and things like that. So if you want to share that information with anyone else, please go ahead, because it's quite important these days. Thank you everybody for attending. And I hope to see you again in 2 weeks' time.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us today, folks. Great to see you, and hope to see you again in a couple of weeks.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you all. Bye for now.
Yeah, thanks, Grant. Thanks, Warren.